Hi again then guys, and welcome to a review which I for one certainly wasn't expecting to do today, but of course we had the newest update drop on Gran Turismo Sport, and we finally now have the car which I personally thought was going to come alongside the Audi Vision GT cars, but of course that's not how it ultimately panned out. The Toyota Supra, the new Gazoo Racing or GR Supra. Now, of course, we already covered this one when the announcement first dropped. We had a batch of photos with it, all in the same livery that you can get it in the game with, and as I said in that video, my thoughts are kind of mixed. It's cool that the Supra is back, but at the same time, it kind of looks a little bit weird, and I think the main reason why I think it looks weird is because we have the FT1 to compare it to. If the FT1 didn't exist, then I think this one would be perfectly fine. It wouldn't be great, but it would be fine. Whereas, because of how good the FT1 looks, it's wider, lower, has more of a supercar stance, which would have been a great rival to stuff like the LFA, or the GTR, or the new NSX. This one, on the other hand, well, it kind of looks like what it is, more of a platform sharer with the BMW Z4, which is exactly what this car is, in road form in particular though. Now, in the game, we're not told what size the engine is. We're told that it has just under 600 horsepower, 591 to be exact, a pretty impressive 514 pound-feet of torque. It's reasonably light at 1,243 kilos, but nothing to write home about necessarily, and the stock horsepower per tonne is 475. Now, there was some speculation, again, myself included, as to what category or class the car would be featured in. I thought that it might be Group X. It's not, of course, it's in Group 3, which, on the one hand, of course, is great, because it means we can actually use it to race with, which is fantastic, unlike Group X cars, or at least apart from one make racing. On the other hand, though, it does share the platform with the FT1, so it's got a little bit of cross-promotion going there for the Toyota brand, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing. It means that you could have even more of a Toyota presence on the grid, without it feeling like just the same car over and over again, as it does with the two different BMW M6s, which are basically just a different livery and that's it, whereas this is a genuinely different car to the FT1. Now, in some ways, I would say being a different car works to its advantage, in some other ways perhaps not. Now, as far as the handling, which of course many people will be wondering about, I think that the physical proportions of this new Supra actually work to its advantage in most circumstances, because of the fact that it is, among other things, narrower than the FT1 certainly feels. I haven't compared the actual widths to see the difference, but I'm pretty sure the FT1 is a wider car. This one feels more nimble, because of the fact that it is so compact. And actually, I would say that the visual shape of the car, with the narrow, compact body but very wide arches, actually reminds me of, kind of ironically, the Z4 GT3, which we already have in the game. That car as well is a little bit taller than a supercar, but narrower as well, fairly long for what it is, and it's got those huge blistered arches. This one has a very similar shape, which is appropriate, given of course that this Supra, as I said, is sharing the platform with a new Z4. Now, in terms of potential downsides, it doesn't have any outstandingly bad things that just glare out at you immediately, which is good. It's a little bit stiff with the more stock-prone settings, but that's nothing that you can't solve. Front engine, rear-wheel drive, plenty of downforce, you've got a lot to work with there. It's a fairly standard race setup for a car like this. So it doesn't really surprise you in any particular way, but it's funny because that's kind of the good and bad thing about this car. It doesn't surprise you in any bad way, but it doesn't really surprise you in any good way either. It feels fairly mediocre, I would say, like a perfectly acceptable race car, but nothing that's going to blow your mind at the same time. So something which you could, funnily enough, put on par with some of the previous, I would say, Supra JGTC cars that we've had in the franchise. Some of them feel great, some of them feel okay. They're not amazing, but they're certainly not bad. I would say that this one kind of feels the same. It is a shame that it doesn't really stand out hugely from the FT1. I would perhaps still give the edge to the FT1 overall in terms of how fun it is to drive, but also how fast it is as well. The FT1 definitely feels like more of a supercar, or at the very least, a super sports exotic, whereas this, well, it feels what it is, a racing sports car. In some ways, that's expected, it is Group 3 after all, but it's just kind of a shame that something as legendary as the Supra name would turn out to be a fairly generic, default-feeling race car. That's a little bit disappointing, and that's coming from someone who isn't a super fan of the Supra, whereas for those who are super fans of it, I think you might be disappointed. Not because it's bad in any particular way, certainly not. It's actually pretty good in some ways. As I said, it is nimble, the power is fairly high, but again, even though the power is almost 600, which a few years ago would seem really good for a car like this, it almost feels maybe a little slow for that. Now, I haven't compared the lap times, so I can't say that for certain, but it certainly doesn't feel as fast as some of the Supras did, even though they had oftentimes less power than this one does, and sometimes less weight, but sometimes more, depending on the category. So, it's a difficult car for me to review too favourably, but also too negatively. It's cool that it's on the game, it's always nice to have a new car on there, and it is nice to see a return of the Supra name, but at the same time it feels like it's almost like they use the name to support a car which wasn't really deserving of it, if that makes sense. Whereas something like the GTR, it lives up to the lineage. The new NSX certainly lives up to the lineage, and we'll have to wait and see if Mazda renews the RX-7, but if they do, I should think they'd probably put a lot of thought into it, whereas for this Toyota, I'm sure that the road car will have a ton of effort and tech and development put into it, doubtless, but for a race car, at least in the game, I don't know, I'm a little underwhelmed. So, it's not a bad car, don't get me wrong, it's certainly worth a try, and for 450 grand, sure, take it up against some of the others. I'm sure that we'll feature it in some kind of rivals match sometime soon to see how it compares. But for now, it's a review which I wish could be more favourable for the car. But overall, give it a try. If you are a Supra fan, sure. It's not too expensive, you can earn that pretty quick with the Blue Moon Bay oval racing method. So yeah, give it a try. Nothing really to lose, potentially something to gain if you end up liking it. And I certainly hope that most people do end up liking it. I'm sure it's just me. But that's it for this review overall, of course. I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.